The burning cross appeared on my front lawn at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, couldn't sleep, hadn't been able to sleep properly in weeks. Something about the house felt wrong at night, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for whatever came next. This is the story of how racist neighbors tried to force me out, and how I fought back and won. But before we begin, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Because this story, this 7-year battle for my home, is going to stay with you forever. I heard my dog, Biscuit, barking before I saw the flames. That frantic, terrified bark that meant something was deeply wrong. I rushed to the window, and there it was, a crude wooden cross, maybe 6 feet tall, burning bright orange against the darkness of my perfect suburban yard. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just stood there in my nightgown, watching the flames dance, watching everything I'd worked for go up in smoke. Then I did something that surprised even me. I grabbed my phone, walked outside in my bare feet, and started recording. This is June 15th, 2019, approximately 3:07 a.m., I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Someone has placed a burning cross on my property at 247 Maple Ridge Drive, Cedar Brook, Tennessee. I am documenting this for the police and for anyone else who needs to see what's happening in this neighborhood. I panned the camera slowly across the scene, the cross, the flames, the darkness beyond. Then I turned it toward the house next door, where I could see a curtain twitch in an upstairs window. "I see you," I said quietly, "and I'm not going anywhere." That was the night everything changed. But to understand how I got there, standing barefoot on a burning lawn, speaking defiance into a camera, you need to know how it all began. My name is Loretta Mee Johnson, and I was born 62 years ago in a small town in rural Alabama, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and the lines between black and white were drawn so deep they might as well have been carved into the earth itself. My father, Samuel Johnson, was a minister at the African Methodist Episcopal Church and a carpenter by trade. My mother, Earlene, taught Sunday school and raised 7 children on a salary that would make modern poverty look luxurious. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had faith, and my parents made sure we understood that both of those things were worth more than any amount of money. I was the 4th of 7, sandwiched in the middle, which meant I learned early how to make myself heard. My older siblings thought I was bossy. My younger ones thought I was protective. The truth was probably somewhere in between. "Loretta, you've got a spirit in you," my grandmother used to say, her gnarled hands cupping my face. "A fighting spirit. The Lord gave it to you for a reason. Don't you ever let anyone break it." I carried those words with me through a lifetime of battles, some small, some large, all of them teaching me that the world wasn't going to give me anything I didn't fight for. I married young, at 19, to a man named Robert Johnson. No relation, just a coincidence of common names that made everyone laugh at the wedding. Robert was a good man, a construction worker who built houses during the day and built our life together at night. We raised 3 children in a series of rental houses and small apartments, always dreaming of something bigger, something that was truly ours. Robert passed away in 2015, taken by a heart attack that came without warning on an ordinary Thursday morning. One moment he was eating breakfast, complaining about the coffee being too weak. The next moment he was gone, and I was a widow at 58, alone for the first time in nearly 40 years. The grief was overwhelming. For months, I couldn't see past it, couldn't imagine a future that didn't include his laugh, his warmth, his steady presence beside me. But grief, I learned, eventually transforms. It doesn't disappear, but it changes shape, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. And as I emerged from the darkest part of that valley, I realized something important. I had money, Robert's life insurance, plus the settlement from the construction company where he'd worked, plus our modest savings. Together, it was more than I'd ever had at one time in my life. Enough to finally do what we'd always dreamed of. Buy a house. A real house in a nice neighborhood, with a yard and a porch and neighbors who took care of their property. Somewhere I could spend my remaining years in peace. I found Cedarbrook through a real estate website, scrolling through listings late at night when sleep wouldn't come. It was a planned community about 40 miles outside Nashville, the kind of neighborhood that appeared in magazines and home improvement shows. Tree-lined streets with names like Maple Ridge and Oak Haven. Houses with manicured lawns and two-car garages. A community center with a pool and a clubhouse. Walking paths through carefully maintained green spaces. It looked like a dream. It looked like everything I'd ever wanted. The listing price was within my budget, barely. A 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, built in 2010, previously owned by a couple who'd relocated for work. I scheduled a showing with the real estate agent, a cheerful white woman named Bethany who assured me the neighborhood was wonderful and very welcoming. When I arrived for the showing, I noticed something immediately. The neighborhood was white, not mostly white, entirely white. Every face I saw during the drive-through was white. Every family in every yard, every jogger on every sidewalk, every child on every bicycle. I'd lived in the South my whole life. I knew what that meant. But I was 60 years old, and I was tired of limiting my dreams based on other people's prejudices. The house was beautiful. The price was right. And the Fair Housing Act said I had every legal right to live wherever I could afford. I made an offer that same day. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers that made 247 Maple Ridge Drive mine. I had no idea that those papers were also a declaration of war. Moving day was supposed to be a celebration. My children, Robert Jr., Denise, and Marcus, had all taken time off work to help me settle into my new home. We arrived in a caravan of vehicles, the moving truck with my furniture, Robert Jr.'s pickup loaded with boxes, Denise's SUV packed with cleaning supplies and food for a family lunch. The house looked even more beautiful in the morning light than it had during the showing. Fresh paint, gleaming windows, a wraparound porch that seemed made for sweet tea and summer evenings. I stood on the front lawn for a long moment, just taking it in. "Mama, you did it," Denise said, squeezing my shoulder. "Daddy would be so proud." "He would," I agreed, blinking back tears. "He really would." We got to work unloading, creating the organized chaos that always accompanies a move. Boxes in the living room. Furniture placement debates in every room. The smell of cleaning products and possibility. It was around noon when I noticed the first sign of trouble. A white man had appeared on the sidewalk in front of my house. He wasn't walking anywhere, just standing there, arms crossed, watching us work. He was maybe 55, with the kind of golf course tan that comes from a life of leisure, wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt with some country club logo on the chest. I walked to the edge of my property, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. "I'm Loretta Johnson. I'm your new neighbor." He didn't smile, didn't extend his hand, just looked at me with an expression I recognized from a lifetime of encounters, the look of someone calculating how much trouble I was going to be. "I'm Gerald Whitmore," he said finally. "I'm president of the Homeowners Association." "Nice to meet you, Gerald. Beautiful neighborhood you've got here." "It is beautiful. We work hard to keep it that way." His eyes drifted over my shoulder, taking in the moving truck, my children carrying boxes, the minor chaos of a family in transition. "The HOA has certain standards, certain expectations. I hope you're prepared to meet them." "I always meet my obligations," I said, my voice still pleasant but my guard rising. "I'm sure we'll get along just fine." "We'll see." He turned and walked away without another word. Robert Jr. appeared beside me, a box in his arms. Who was that? The welcoming committee, apparently. Something in my tone made him frown. "Mama, are you sure about this? There are nice neighborhoods closer to us, where you'd have family nearby." "I'm sure, baby." I patted his arm. "I've dealt with men like Gerald Whitmore my whole life. He doesn't scare me." But that night, after my children had gone home and I was alone in my new house for the first time, I sat on my beautiful wraparound porch and watched the sun set over my beautiful new neighborhood, and I felt the weight of what I'd taken on settle around my shoulders like a heavy coat. The first official communication came 3 days later. A letter from the Cedarbrook Homeowners Association, delivered to my mailbox with formal ceremony. I opened it at my kitchen table, reading with growing disbelief. Dear Mrs. Johnson, welcome to the Cedarbrook community. As a new homeowner, you are required to familiarize yourself with the HOA covenant, a copy of which is enclosed. Please note the following immediate concerns regarding your property. 1. The exterior paint color on your front door, currently red, does not match the approved color palette. You are required to repaint within 30 days. 2. The garden flag displayed on your front porch, currently featuring sunflowers, is not on the approved decoration list. Please remove immediately. 3. Your vehicle, a 2015 Honda Accord, has been observed parked in the driveway overnight. Per Section 4.2 of the covenant, all vehicles must be parked in the garage between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Failure to address these concerns will result in fines, as outlined in Section 12 of the covenant. Sincerely, Gerald Whitmore, President, Cedarbrook HOA. I read the letter 3 times, certain I was missing something. The red door had been there when I bought the house. The previous owners had painted it, and no one had complained. The sunflower flag was a gift from my granddaughter, and my garage was currently full of boxes I hadn't finished unpacking. I walked outside and looked up and down the street. 3 houses down, I could see a blue door. Across the street, a yellow one. Several porches displayed flags and decorations, American flags, seasonal wreaths, even a small statue of a garden gnome. None of them, apparently, had received letters about violations. I went back inside and called the real estate agent, Bethany, who'd been so helpful during the purchase. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," she said breezily. "Gerald can be a bit particular. Just comply with the requests and everything will smooth over." But other houses have colored doors. Other houses have decorations. I'm sure there's an explanation. These HOA things can be complicated. Just try to go along with it, Loretta. You don't want to start off on the wrong foot. I hung up feeling more unsettled than before. Something about Bethany's tone, the way she'd said, "go along with it," felt less like advice and more like warning. I complied with the letter, not because I agreed with it, but because I was new and I wanted to give the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Gerald Whitmore was just a stickler for rules. Maybe I was being paranoid. I painted my door a neutral beige that appeared on the approved color list. I took down my granddaughter's sunflower flag. I moved boxes around in the garage until I could squeeze my car inside. 3 days after completing these tasks, another letter arrived. This one cited my trash cans being visible from the street on a non-collection day. A fine of $50 was included. I'd put the trash cans out the night before collection, exactly as the covenant specified. I'd brought them in the morning after collection, exactly as the covenant specified. But apparently, they'd been visible for approximately 2 hours during that window, and someone had photographed them as evidence. The next week, another letter. My lawn had been measured and found to be 1/4 inch above the maximum allowable height. Another fine. The week after that, another letter. A delivery truck had been parked in front of my house for more than 30 minutes, which apparently violated visitor parking regulations. Another fine. Each letter was signed by Gerald Whitmore. Each included photographs. Each was delivered with the precision of a military operation designed to make my life unbearable. I was being watched. Constantly, obsessively watched. Every move I made was being documented, analyzed, weaponized against me. And I began to understand that this wasn't about doors or flags or grass height. This was about making me leave. The harassment escalated gradually, like a fever rising degree by degree. First, it was the letters, an endless stream of violations, fines, and warnings that arrived with mechanical regularity. Then it became something more personal. My mailbox was vandalized 3 times in 6 weeks. The first time it was knocked over, an accident, I told myself, probably some teenager with a baseball bat. The second time, it was spray-painted with a racial slur that made my blood run cold. The third time, it was completely destroyed, the metal twisted and torn like something had attacked it with fury. I reported each incident to the police. A young officer took notes, promised to look into it, and nothing happened. No investigation, no follow-up, no arrests. "These things are hard to prove," the officer said apologetically during his third visit. "Without witnesses or security footage, there's not much we can do." "Then I'll get security footage," I said. I hired a company to install cameras around my property. Front porch, backyard, driveway, every angle I could think of. The installation was expensive, eating into the savings I'd hoped to preserve for my retirement. But I needed evidence. I needed proof that what was happening wasn't paranoia or imagination. The night the cameras went up, someone threw a brick through my living room window. I wasn't home when it happened. I'd gone to Nashville to have dinner with Denise and her family. When I returned to find glass scattered across my living room floor, a brick lying among the shards, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear, real physical fear. But alongside the fear was something else, something harder and colder. The same fighting spirit my grandmother had seen in me all those years ago. I called the police, again, reported the incident, again, watched them take notes and make promises, again. Then I reviewed my security footage. The cameras had captured everything: a figure in dark clothes, face obscured by a hood, approaching my house from the direction of the Whitmore property next door. The brick throw was clear, deliberate, practiced. And as the figure retreated, the hood slipped slightly, revealing just enough of a profile to recognize. It was Tyler Whitmore, Gerald's 23-year-old son. I didn't go to the police with the footage, not yet. I'd lived 62 years as a Black woman in America. I understood that evidence alone wasn't always enough, that systems designed to protect could also be systems designed to ignore. I needed to be strategic. I needed allies. I needed a plan. The first call I made was to my son Marcus, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm in Memphis. "Mama, this is serious," he said after I'd explained everything. "You need a lawyer, a real one, someone who specializes in civil rights, housing discrimination, hate crimes." "I know, that's why I'm calling you. Who do you recommend?" He gave me a name, Patricia Acaffer, a civil rights attorney based in Nashville, Nigerian American, with a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers considered too difficult or too controversial. "She doesn't lose often," Marcus said, "and when she wins big." I called Patricia's office the next morning. Her assistant took my information, asked a few questions, and scheduled a consultation for the following week. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Patricia Acaffer was not what I expected. She was young, mid-30s, maybe, with natural hair pulled back in a professional style and eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. Her office was modest but organized, the walls covered with framed news articles about cases she'd won. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "tell me everything." I did. From the first encounter with Gerald Whitmore on moving day to the latest brick through my window, I laid out every incident, every letter, every act of vandalism and intimidation. I showed her the security footage. I showed her the photographs I'd taken. I showed her the stack of HOA violation letters that had grown thick as a novel. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "This is textbook harassment," she said finally. "Targeted, systematic, designed to force you out of your home. And the burning cross," she shook her head. "That's not just harassment, that's a hate crime, federal hate crime potentially." "So what can we do?" "Several things. First, we document everything. Which you've been doing excellent work, by the way. Most clients don't think to create a paper trail this thorough." My husband always said I was obsessive about organization. Patricia smiled slightly. "Your husband was right, and it's going to help us enormously. Second, we file complaints with every relevant agency, local police, FBI, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, Tennessee Human Rights Commission. We create pressure from multiple directions. And third, we sue. Her voice hardened. Gerald Whitmore, the HOA, anyone else we can prove was involved in this campaign. We sue them for housing discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil rights violations. We make it so expensive to harass you that they'll regret ever setting foot on your property. Can we win? Patricia looked at me with those penetrating eyes. Mrs. Johnson, you have video evidence of a man throwing a brick through your window. You have documentation of selective HOA enforcement that targeted you while ignoring identical violations by white homeowners. You have a burning cross, which is about as clear a symbol of racial intimidation as exists in American history. She leaned forward. Yes, we can win. The question is whether you're ready for the fight, because it will be a fight. They'll come after you harder before they back down. They'll try to make you miserable. They might even try to make you scared enough to quit. I thought about my grandmother's hands on my face, her voice telling me about the fighting spirit the Lord had given me. I thought about Robert, who'd spent his life building things for other people while dreaming of building something of his own. I thought about my children and grandchildren, who deserved to live in a world where they could buy a house anywhere they could afford without facing terror. I'm not quitting, I said. I've been ready for this fight my whole life. Patricia smiled, a real smile this time, fierce and bright. Good, then let's go to war. The next 3 months were a blur of legal filings, agency complaints, and escalating tensions. Patricia moved with the precision of a general commanding a campaign. She filed complaints with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, documenting the burning cross and the pattern of racial intimidation. She filed with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, alleging housing discrimination by the HOA. She filed a civil lawsuit nomming Gerald Whitmore, Tyler Whitmore, and the Cedarbrook Homeowners Association as defendants. Each filing generated attention. Local newspapers picked up the story. Nashville television stations sent reporters to my street. A civil rights organization in Memphis issued a statement of support. Suddenly, what had been a private nightmare was becoming a public cause. The attention was double-edged. On one hand, it brought allies I hadn't expected. Neighbors from across Tennessee sent letters of support. A local church organized a prayer vigil on my front lawn. A community organization started a fundraiser to help with my legal expenses. People I'd never met were standing with me, their solidarity a reminder that not everyone in the world was like Gerald Whitmore. On the other hand, the attention made my enemies bolder. The anonymous phone calls started 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. They came at all hours, midnight, 3 a.m., dawn, always from blocked numbers, always with the same message. Variations on a theme of hatred, threats, demands that I leave. You don't belong here. This neighborhood was fine before you came. Go back where you came from. I documented every call, saving voicemails when they were left, noting dates and times when they weren't. Patricia added them to our growing file of evidence. Then came the letters. Not HOA letters this time, anonymous ones, slipped under my door or left in my mailbox. Some were crude, barely literate expressions of racial hatred. Others were disturbingly sophisticated, typed and formatted like business correspondence, explaining in calm detail why people like me were destroying people like them. One included a photograph of my house, with a target drawn over it in red marker. I showed that one to Patricia immediately. We need to contact the FBI again, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. This has crossed into direct threats. That's federal territory. Will they actually do something? They have to. A threat like this, combined with everything else we've documented, they can't ignore it anymore. The FBI agents who arrived at my house were different from the local police. They were professional, thorough, taking every piece of evidence seriously. They interviewed me for 3 hours, asking detailed questions about every incident, every suspect, every interaction with my neighbors. They took copies of all my documentation, the security footage, the photographs, the letters, the voicemails. "Mrs. Johnson, you've done exceptional work preserving evidence," one agent said, a black woman named Agent Williams who seemed to understand exactly what I was facing. "That's going to help us significantly." "What happens now?" "We investigate. We trace what we can trace, identify who we can identify. The burning cross alone is a federal hate crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 249. If we can prove who did it, they're looking at serious prison time." "And the others, Gerald Whitmore, the HOA. "Civil conspiracy charges potentially, depending on what we find." Agent Williams paused. "I want you to understand something, Mrs. Johnson. Cases like this can take time. Months, sometimes years. The wheels of justice turn slowly, especially when the defendants have resources to fight. I've waited 62 years to own a home in a neighborhood like this. I can wait a little longer for justice." Agent Williams smiled slightly. "I believe you can. Stay strong and keep documenting. You never know what piece of evidence will be the one that breaks the case open." While the federal investigation proceeded, Patricia pushed forward with the civil case. The discovery process was revealing. Under oath, Gerald Whitmore was forced to turn over HOA records going back years. What those records showed was damning. In the 12-year history of Cedarbrook, only 3 families of color had ever purchased homes in the neighborhood. Each had received an avalanche of HOA violations within weeks of moving in. Each had eventually sold their homes and left. None had stayed longer than 18 months. The pattern was undeniable. The HOA wasn't enforcing standards, it was enforcing segregation, using the covenant as a weapon against anyone who threatened the neighborhood's all-white character. Patricia also subpoenaed communications between HOA board members. The emails were explosive. "We need to make her feel unwelcome," Gerald Whitmore had written to another board member 3 days after I moved in. "The covenant is our tool. Use it aggressively. Don't give her room to breathe." Another email from a board member named Richard Sullivan. "My wife is worried about property values. We need to document everything this woman does. Eventually, we'll find something that sticks." And most damning of all, an email from Gerald Whitmore to his son Tyler, sent 2 days before the brick came through my window. "Time to escalate. Make sure there's no evidence." When Patricia showed me these emails, I felt vindicated and sickened in equal measure. Vindicated because they proved everything I'd suspected. Sickened because grown adults had sat around planning how to terrorize a 62-year-old widow for the crime of buying a house while black. "This is going to bury them," Patricia said with grim satisfaction. "Conspiracy to violate civil rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and depending on how a jury interprets that email to Tyler, possible accessory charges for the vandalism." "What about the burning cross? Can they prove who did that?" "The FBI is still working on it, but the evidence is pointing in an interesting direction." She paused. "They found accelerant residue matching a brand of lighter fluid sold at the hardware store where Tyler Whitmore works. And surveillance footage from a gas station 2 miles away shows his truck in the area around 2:30 a.m. on the night of the cross burning." My heart began to pound. So it was him. "We can't prove it definitively yet, but we're close. And when we do prove it," Patricia's eyes were hard, "he's going to prison, Loretta, real prison for real time, and his father is going to lose everything he has in the civil case." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually be possible. The federal indictment came down in October, 14 months after the burning cross appeared on my lawn. Tyler Whitmore was arrested at his workplace, the hardware store where he'd purchased the lighter fluid that would help convict him. The charges were severe. Federal hate crime charges under 18 U.S.C. Section 249. Conspiracy to intimidate and threaten a person in the free exercise of her fair housing rights, and destruction of property in connection with a hate crime. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 25 years in federal prison. The arrest made national news. A photograph of Tyler being led away in handcuffs appeared in newspapers from coast to coast. his face twisted with the same entitled anger I'd seen in his father's eyes on my first day in the neighborhood. Gerald Whitmore held a press conference outside the county courthouse, flanked by expensive lawyers, claiming his son was innocent, that the evidence was fabricated, that I was the real criminal, a troublemaker who'd moved to Cedarbrook specifically to cause problems and file lawsuits. "This woman is not a victim," Gerald said, his voice trembling with rage. "She's a predator. She targeted our community, manufactured incidents, and now she's trying to destroy our family. But we will not be intimidated. We will fight these charges and we will prevail." I watched the press conference on television, my stomach churning with anger and disbelief. He was standing in front of cameras, claiming victimhood, when his son had burned a cross on my lawn and thrown a brick through my window. Patricia called immediately after the press conference ended. "He just made a massive mistake," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Defamation. He accused you of fabricating evidence and manufacturing incidents on national television. That's actionable. We can add it to the civil suit. He's going to keep coming after me. Let him. Every time he opens his mouth, he digs himself deeper. The best thing he can do for our case is keep talking." The civil trial began in February, 3 years after I'd first moved to Cedarbrook. 3 years of harassment, vandalism, terror, and legal battles. 3 years of sleepless nights and security cameras, and looking over my shoulder every time I walked to my own mailbox. 3 years of being treated like an invader in my own home. But I had survived, and now it was time for accountability. The courtroom was packed on the first day. My children sat in the front row, along with supporters from the community organizations that had rallied to my cause. Media representatives filled the press section. Patricia had arranged for the trial to be covered extensively, understanding that sunlight was the best disinfectant. Gerald Whitmore sat at the defense table with his team of lawyers, his face a mask of controlled hostility. Richard Sullivan and 2 other HOA board members sat beside him, co-defendants in the conspiracy that had made my life a living hell. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Patricia began in her opening statement, "this case is about a simple principle, the right of every American to live in their home without being terrorized because of the color of their skin." She walked them through the evidence, the HOA letters, the vandalism, the burning cross, the emails revealing the coordinated campaign against me. She showed them photographs of my destroyed mailbox, my broken window, the charred remnants of the cross that had burned on my lawn. "The defendants will tell you this was about standards and property values," Patricia continued. "They'll tell you Mrs. Johnson was simply a difficult neighbor who couldn't follow rules. But the evidence tells a different story. The evidence shows a systematic campaign of racial harassment designed to force a black woman out of a white neighborhood." She turned to face the jury directly. "Mrs. Johnson came to Cedarbrook looking for peace and quiet in her retirement years. What she found was hatred. What she found was terror. And today, we're asking you to hold the people responsible accountable for what they did." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand, painting a picture of a community corrupted by prejudice and a leadership willing to use any means necessary to maintain segregation. A former HOA board member testified that Gerald Whitmore had explicitly stated his goal was to keep the neighborhood the way it's supposed to be, a phrase everyone understood without explanation. A neighbor who'd initially been afraid to speak testified about seeing Tyler Whitmore near my property on multiple occasions at odd hours, always watching, always waiting. A forensic expert testified about the digital evidence recovered from Gerald's computer, the deleted emails, the search history showing research into legal ways to force out neighbors, the documentation of my every move during my first months in the neighborhood. And then I took the stand. Patricia led me through my testimony carefully, allowing me to tell my story in my own words. I spoke about Robert, about our dreams of homeownership, about the joy I'd felt the day I signed the papers for 247 Maple Ridge Drive. And I spoke about what had happened since. Every night I check the locks 3 times before bed, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. Every time I hear a noise outside, I freeze. Every time I see a car I don't recognize on my street, I wonder if they're coming for me. I looked at the jury, 12 faces, a mix of races and ages, all watching me with varying degrees of sympathy and attention. I'm 65 years old. I worked my whole life, raised 3 children, paid my taxes, followed the rules. All I wanted was a nice home in a nice neighborhood where I could spend my retirement in peace. I felt tears welling, but refused to let them fall. They took that from me. They took my peace, my safety, my sense of belonging. And for what? Because my skin is the wrong color. I turned to look directly at Gerald Whitmore, who met my gaze with cold defiance. I want my peace back. I want my home back. I want to sit on my porch and watch the sunset without wondering if tonight is the night someone tries to burn it down. I turned back to the jury. I'm asking you to help me get that back. The defense tried everything. Gerald Whitmore's lawyers painted me as an angry black woman with a chip on my shoulder, someone who'd misinterpreted innocent actions as racial harassment. They claimed the HOA violations were standard practice, applied equally to all homeowners. They suggested the vandalism and cross-burning were the work of random criminals with no connection to their clients. Mrs. Johnson came to Cedarbrook looking for racism, the lead defense attorney argued in his closing statement. And when she didn't find it, she manufactured it. She created a narrative, manipulated evidence, and now she's trying to profit from false allegations against innocent people. It was a desperate strategy, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Patricia's closing was devastating. The defense wants you to believe that Loretta Johnson, a 65-year-old widow, a retired woman, a grandmother, is some kind of criminal mastermind who orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame innocent people. She paused, letting the absurdity sink in. They want you to believe she burned a cross on her own lawn, that she threw a brick through her own window, that she vandalized her own mailbox and sent threatening letters to herself. She shook her head slowly. Or you can believe the evidence, the emails, the surveillance footage, the forensic analysis, the pattern of behavior that targeted 3 families of color before Mrs. Johnson ever arrived. You can believe what you've seen with your own eyes and heard with your own ears. She walked toward the jury box, her voice softening. The defendants are counting on something. They're counting on the same thing that's protected people like them for generations. They're counting on you to value their comfort over Mrs. Johnson's rights, their property values over her humanity, their version of the way things have always been over the law of this land. Patricia placed her hands on the railing of the jury box. Don't let them be right. Show them that this is not their grandfather's America anymore. Show them that in this country, in this century, we hold people accountable when they terrorize their neighbors. Show Loretta Johnson that the justice system she believed in was worth believing in. She returned to our table and sat down. Show her that she was right to fight. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting, of packing the corridors outside the courtroom, of fielding calls from my children who couldn't be there every moment but wanted updates constantly. 2 days of watching the clock and praying and trying not to let hope or fear consume me. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. Walking back into that courtroom felt like walking into my own future. Everything I'd fought for, everything I'd suffered, would be decided in the next few minutes. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia beside me, her hand briefly squeezing mine under the table. The jury filed in. The foreman, a middle-aged white man with kind eyes, stood when the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. We have, Your Honor. On the count of conspiracy to violate fair housing rights, how do you find? We find the defendants guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a bell. I felt my breath catch. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, how do you find? We find the defendants guilty. On the count of negligent supervision regarding property damage and harassment, how do you find? We find the defendants guilty. Each guilty rang out like vindication made audible. Behind me, I heard Denise crying. Robert Jr. whispered, "Thank God, thank God." The judge turned to the matter of damages. The jury has awarded compensatory damages in the amount of $750,000 to cover property damage, legal expenses, and emotional suffering. Additionally, the jury has awarded punitive damages in the amount of $2.5 million, reflecting the egregious and intentional nature of the defendant's conduct. $3.25 million. I couldn't process the number. It felt abstract, unreal. But what felt very real was the expression on Gerald Whitmore's face. The color had drained completely, leaving him gray and hollow. His lawyers were whispering urgently in his ear, but he wasn't listening. He was staring at the table in front of him like a man watching his entire world collapse. Good. The verdict made national news. Jury awards $3.25 million in landmark housing discrimination case. The headlines exploded across every platform. My face was on television, on websites, on newspaper front pages. Patricia gave interviews explaining the significance of the verdict, framing it as a warning to anyone who thought they could terrorize their neighbors with impunity. Gerald Whitmore announced he would appeal. Nobody believed it would succeed. The Cedarbrook Homeowners Association, facing bankruptcy from the judgment, was forced to dissolve. A court-appointed receiver took over management of the common areas, and new bylaws were drafted with oversight from the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. Property values in the neighborhood, contrary to what the Whitmores had predicted, actually increased. It turned out that most people would rather live in a community known for justice than one known for racism. But the consequence that mattered most to me was smaller, more personal. 3 weeks after the verdict, I was sitting on my wraparound porch, on my property, in my home, when a moving truck pulled up to the Whitmore house next door. I watched from my rocking chair as movers carried out furniture, boxes, the accumulated possessions of a family that had spent years trying to drive me away. Gerald Whitmore directed the movers with slumped shoulders and defeated eyes. His wife, who I'd rarely seen during my years in the neighborhood, supervised with tight-lipped anxiety. At one point, Gerald looked over and caught me watching. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then I raised my glass of sweet tea in a small salute. He turned away and went back inside. I never saw him again. The criminal trial was shorter, but no less satisfying. Tyler Whitmore's federal case went before a jury in June. The evidence was overwhelming. The surveillance footage, the accelerant analysis, the digital trail connecting him to both the cross burning and the brick through my window. His lawyers tried to argue that he'd been influenced by his father, that he was young and impressionable, that he'd been raised in an environment that normalized hatred. The jury wasn't moved. Tyler Whitmore was convicted on all counts. At sentencing, the judge, a Black woman named Judge Patricia Hayes, delivered remarks that would be quoted in legal textbooks for years to come. "Mr. Whitmore, you are not a victim of circumstance. You are a grown man who made deliberate choices to terrorize an innocent woman because of the color of her skin. You burned a cross on her lawn, a symbol of terror that has haunted Black Americans for over a century. You threw a brick through her window while she slept. You participated in a campaign designed to drive her from her home." She leaned forward. "The sentence I impose today is not just about punishing you. It's about sending a message to everyone who thinks they can commit these acts without consequence. The message is this: we see you, we will find you, and we will hold you accountable." Tyler Whitmore was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. When the sentence was announced, I closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. It was finally over. 5 years have passed since the verdicts. I'm sitting on my wraparound porch as I tell you this, the same porch where I once watched a cross burn, where I once stood in my nightgown recording evidence of hatred. The same porch where I've now watched 5 years of sunsets, 5 years of seasons changing, 5 years of peace I fought to earn. The neighborhood has transformed in ways I never could have predicted. After the Whitmores left, A young black family bought their house, Marcus and Tanya Williams, with their 2 children and a golden retriever named Scout. They'd seen the news coverage of my case and deliberately sought out Cedarbrook, wanting to be part of the change. "You made it safe for us," Tanya told me the day they moved in, tears in her eyes. "You stood your ground so families like ours could come after you." They weren't the only ones. In the 5 years since the trial, Cedarbrook has become one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the county. White families who'd been uncomfortable with the old regime, but afraid to speak up, started welcoming new neighbors of all backgrounds. The community center now hosts Juneteenth celebrations and Diwali parties and Lunar New Year gatherings. The pool where I was once stared at like an intruder is now filled with children of every color, splashing together on summer afternoons. The change wasn't easy or immediate. There were residents who left rather than accept the new reality, selling their homes and moving to communities they hoped would remain unchanged. I wished them well, sincerely. They were choosing to live in a shrinking world, and that was punishment enough. But most people stayed. Most people, it turned out, had never shared Gerald Whitmore's obsession with exclusion. They'd just been afraid to challenge him. Once his power was broken, they were free to be who they'd wanted to be all along. The settlement money changed my life in practical ways. I paid off the house completely, eliminating the mortgage that had worried me during sleepless nights. I set aside funds for my grandchildren's education, 7 of them now, ranging from kindergarten to high school. I made donations to civil rights organizations that had supported me during the fight. But I was careful not to let the money change who I was. I still drove my Honda Accord. I still cooked my own meals and tended my own garden. I still went to church every Sunday and called my mother, 91 now, still sharp, still proud of her daughter, every evening before bed. What I did do was use some of the money to create something lasting. The Loretta Johnson Fair Housing Fund launched 2 years after the trial. We provide legal assistance to families facing housing discrimination, help with documentation and evidence gathering, and support for the emotional toll of fighting these battles. Patricia Ackhaffer serves on our board, offering guidance and occasional pro bono representation for cases that need it. In our first 3 years, we've helped 47 families challenge discriminatory practices. Not all of them went to trial. Most settled once the landlords or HOAs realized they were facing a well-documented case with experienced legal support. But each family got to stay in their home. Each family got the justice they deserved. That's the legacy I wanted. Not revenge, but ripples. Each family we help helps another family have the courage to fight. Each case we win makes the next case easier. Each victory chips away at the wall of discrimination that's been built in this country for centuries. My relationship with the community deepened in unexpected ways. I became something of a local celebrity, not a status I'd sought or particularly enjoyed, but one I learned to use for good. Schools invited me to speak to students about civil rights and courage. Churches asked me to give testimony about faith during adversity. Community organizations sought my presence at events, understanding that my story resonated with people facing their own battles. I always said yes, not because I craved attention, but because I remembered being alone. I remembered feeling like I was the only one fighting, the only one facing hatred, the only one wondering if the struggle was worth it. If my presence could make someone else feel less alone, that was worth every inconvenience. One speaking engagement particularly stays with me. It was at a local high school, diverse, underfunded, the kind of school that gets forgotten by politicians who talk about education, but never visit neighborhoods like this. After my presentation, a young black girl approached me hesitantly. She was maybe 16, with natural hair and anxious eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby." "Weren't you scared? When all that stuff was happening, weren't you scared to stay? Scared they might really hurt you?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "I was terrified," I admitted. "Every single day. Fear woke me up in the morning and kept me awake at night. I had nightmares for years, still have them sometimes." Her face fell slightly, as if she'd hoped I'd offer a secret to fearlessness. But here's what I learned, I continued. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do despite the fear. I was scared every day, but I stayed every day. I was terrified, but I fought anyway. And eventually, the fighting became more powerful than the fear. How do you know when to fight and when to walk away? I smiled. That's the wisdom of age, child. You fight when walking away means losing something essential, your dignity, your home, your sense of who you are. You walk away when staying means losing yourself entirely. I took her hand. You'll know the difference when the time comes. Trust yourself. She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. A seed planted that I hoped would bloom someday when she needed it. The hardest part of these 5 years has been learning to live without vigilance. For so long, every sound was a threat. Every stranger was suspicious. Every night brought the possibility of new violence. I had trained myself to be constantly alert, constantly prepared, constantly expecting the worst. Letting go of that vigilance was harder than acquiring it. I still check my cameras every morning, though they now mostly capture deer and rabbits crossing my yard. I still sometimes wake at 3 a.m., heart pounding, certain I've heard something. I still occasionally look at the spot on my lawn where the cross burned and feel a ghost of the old terror. Trauma doesn't disappear just because justice is served. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the reflexes we develop to survive. Healing isn't a destination, it's a daily practice. I see a therapist now, a Black woman named Dr. Angela Foster who specializes in racial trauma. For the first year, I thought therapy was for people who couldn't handle their problems. My mother's generation didn't believe in talking to strangers about family business. But Dr. Foster helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't ordinary stress. It was systematic dehumanization, and it had left wounds that needed professional attention. There was no shame in seeking help, only wisdom. You survived something extraordinary, she told me during one of our sessions. Now you're learning to thrive in the aftermath. Those are 2 different skills, and both require practice. I practice every day. Some days are easier than others, but the trajectory is upward. The peace I fought for is becoming real, one sunrise at a time. Last month, the new HOA held its annual community gathering in the common area near my house. I watched from my porch as neighbors of all backgrounds mingled, sharing food, playing games, laughing together. Children ran between the tables while parents chatted and elderly residents sat in comfortable chairs, surveying the scene with satisfaction. Someone had hung a banner, "Welcome to Cedarbrook, where everyone belongs." I thought about Gerald Whitmore, probably still bitter in whatever gated community had accepted him. I thought about Tyler, serving year 5 of his 12-year sentence. I thought about all the people who tried to push me out, convinced that their hatred was stronger than my determination. They'd been wrong, so wrong. Marcus Williams spotted me on my porch and waved. "Mrs. Johnson, come join us." I rose from my rocking chair, straightened my dress, and walked toward the gathering, toward the community I'd helped create, the neighbors who'd become family, the home I'd earned the right to call my own. The girl they'd tried to force out had become the grandmother of the neighborhood. And I wasn't going anywhere. I turned 67 last month. My children threw me a party in the backyard of 247 Maple Ridge Drive, the same backyard where I once found threatening notes tucked under my fence, where I once watched strangers creeping in the shadows of my security cameras. Now it was filled with laughter and music, and 3 generations of family celebrating a milestone I wasn't always sure I'd reach. My mother made the trip from Alabama, 92 years old and still fierce as ever. She sat in the place of honor, a comfortable chair in the shade, surveying her descendants with the satisfaction of a general reviewing victorious troops. "You did good, Loretta me," she said when I knelt beside her to check if she needed anything. "Your daddy would be proud. Lord knows I am." "I learned from you, Mama." "No," she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You went beyond what I taught you. I taught you to survive. You taught yourself to fight and to win." I stayed there beside her for a long moment, feeling the connection between generations, between struggles, between victories won and victories still to come. Robert visits me in dreams sometimes. Not nightmares, gentle dreams, where we're sitting on this very porch, watching the sunset the way we always planned. He never speaks, but his presence is warm and approving. When I wake from these dreams, I don't feel grief anymore. I feel accompanied. I bought the house, baby, I whisper sometimes to his photograph on my nightstand. I kept it. They tried everything and I kept it. I know, I imagine him responding. I always knew you would. The life insurance money that made this purchase possible was his final gift to me, a gift he never could have imagined would require so much fighting to keep. But Robert knew me. He knew my spirit, my stubbornness, my refusal to back down from bullies. He chose the right woman to leave his legacy with. The impact of my case extended far beyond Cedarbrook. Legal scholars have written about the Whitmore verdict as a turning point in housing discrimination litigation. The combination of civil and criminal prosecution, the successful use of digital evidence, the massive punitive damages, all of it created a template that other attorneys have followed. Patricia Acaffer told me recently that she's consulted on over 30 cases across the country that cite our legal strategies. You changed how these cases are fought, she said. And more importantly, you showed people that fighting is worth it. The Tennessee legislature passed new protections for homeowners facing HOA harassment, partly in response to what happened to me. The law now requires HOA complaints to be reviewed by an independent ombudsman before fines can be imposed, and it creates criminal penalties for selective enforcement based on protected characteristics. They called it the Loretta Johnson Fair Housing Act. I attended the signing ceremony, standing beside the governor as he put pen to paper. When they handed me a framed copy of the legislation, I held it to my chest and thought about all the families who would be protected, all the battles they wouldn't have to fight because we'd fought this one. That's legacy. Not monuments or statues, but laws and precedents and paths cleared for those who come after. I still get letters sometimes, not threatening ones anymore, but letters of gratitude and solidarity. A woman in Arizona who used my story to find the courage to challenge her own discriminatory HOA. A family in Ohio who referenced my case in their lawsuit and won a settlement. Young law students who write to tell me they're pursuing civil rights work because of what I did. Each letter is a thread in a tapestry larger than I ever imagined. I'm not just Loretta Johnson, widow and grandmother. I'm part of something that stretches back to the founding of this country and forward to futures I'll never see. The fight for fair housing didn't start with me. It goes back to the Fair Housing Act of 1968, to the Civil Rights Movement, to generations of Black Americans who demanded the right to live where they chose. I'm just one link in a very long chain. But every link matters. Every person who stands and says no more makes it easier for the next person to stand. Every victory, no matter how small or how costly, pushes the line forward. I think about that sometimes, about my small place in the grand sweep of history. It's humbling and empowering in equal measure. My granddaughter, Jasmine, Denise's oldest, is in law school now. She wants to be a civil rights attorney, she told me. She wants to fight the battles I fought, but with more education, more resources, more preparation. She wants to honor what I went through by making sure it happens to fewer families in the future. Grandma, you showed me what's possible, she said during her last visit. Not just winning, but the way you won, with documentation and strategy and patience. You fought smart, not just hard. I fought scared, I corrected. I was terrified every single day. That makes it even more impressive. You were scared and you did it anyway. That's real courage. I cupped her face in my hands, the way my grandmother once cupped mine. The Lord gave you a fighting spirit, Jasmine. I see it in you, same as it was in me, same as it was in your great-great-grandmother. Don't you ever let anyone break it. She hugged me tight, and I felt the chain extending. My grandmother to me to Jasmine, Jasmine to generations yet unborn. This is how change happens. not in grand, sweeping revolutions, but in the passing of spirit from one generation to the next, in the accumulation of courage across centuries. Every evening now, I sit on my wraparound porch and watch the sun set over Cedarbrook. The houses glow golden in the fading light. Children ride bicycles home for dinner. Neighbors wave to each other across yards. The smell of grilling meat drifts through the air as families gather for evening meals. It looks like any neighborhood in America, and that's exactly the point. This was never about forcing myself into spaces where I wasn't wanted. It was about proving that I had every right to be here, that my money was as green as anyone else's, that my dreams of homeownership were as valid as anyone else's, that my presence in a neighborhood didn't diminish it but enriched it. Gerald Whitmore spent years trying to preserve something that was never worth preserving. He fought to maintain walls that only imprisoned the people behind them. In the end, his hatred destroyed his family, his finances, and his community standing, while the target of his hatred sits peacefully on her porch, surrounded by love. That's not revenge, that's justice. And sometimes, when the light is right and the breeze carries the sound of children laughing, I could swear I hear Robert's voice on the wind. You did it, Loretta. You're finally home. As I sit here now, on the porch I fought 7 years to keep, I sometimes think about the woman who stood on this lawn at 3 a.m., watching a cross burn, choosing to record instead of run. She was so scared, so alone, so uncertain whether fighting was worth the cost. I wish I could go back and tell her what I know now. That the cross would burn itself out, but her determination wouldn't. That the people who hated her would lose everything while she gained everything that mattered. That the house they tried to take from her would become a symbol of victory, a gathering place for community, a home filled with love and laughter and 3 generations of family. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're facing harassment, discrimination, hatred in the place you call home, I need you to hear me. Document everything. Every incident, every insult, every act of intimidation. Build your paper trail like you're building a fortress, because someday that evidence will be your weapon. Find allies. Lawyers, neighbors, organizations, anyone who will stand with you. You don't have to fight alone, and you shouldn't try. But most importantly, don't leave. Don't let them win by driving you out. If you have the legal right to be somewhere, exercise that right. Let them waste their energy on hatred while you build your life. Their hatred is exhausting. Your persistence is renewable. So I ask you now, what home are you fighting for? What neighborhood wants you gone? And what are you going to do about it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, because your story matters, not just to you, but to everyone who needs to know that fighting back is possible. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who's facing their own battle, their own harassment, their own cross burning on their own front lawn. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know victory is possible. Until next time, this is Auntie Me reminding you. They can burn crosses. They can throw bricks. They can write letters and make threats and do everything in their power to force you out. But they can never, ever take your home unless you let them. Stay strong, stay documented, and never stop fighting.